So the base is $60K with 0.5% equity. But most importantly, you'll be based in SF with the title of founding engineer, basically a co-founder without worrying about dilution. And you'll learn so much building the product from scratch. Oh man, as soon as I saw this on my feed, I knew we were going to have to talk about it. In particular, the average YC startup offer bit. This offer is not good. And there's a lot of reasons why it's not good. There's so many parts that we have to discuss here. From the salary of $60K to the 0.5% equity to the based in SF to the basically a co-founder. There's enough here that it has me concerned about how people currently understand startups. If this is the type of offers that people are getting, you shouldn't work at a startup. But I don't necessarily know if this is the type of offer people are getting. What I absolutely know is that most people who are considering these offers don't understand the dynamics of a startup and what they should expect as their equity, as their pay, as their title and role, and how much work they should be doing. There's so much confusion around what working at a startup means, even more so than what fundraising for a startup means, which is already a topic people don't get. I've been in the startup world for quite a while now. I've invested in over 100 of them. I help a lot of them with hiring. I've helped at least 36 people with getting jobs at startups this year alone. I know this stuff relatively well. There are so many red flags in here that I feel like we got to talk for a bit. It's my goal to both break down why this is an atrocious offer, both in how it's delivered and what it actually is, as well as show how working at a startup should work. And if somehow you still want to do it after everything I talk about, what doing that right will look like. Whether you're a founder running their own startup that's starting to hire, you're an employee at an existing company that's considering a startup, or you're just curious about the dynamics of how getting jobs in this space works, I'm going to do my best to make this one useful. But it's going to be a little bit chaotic, and I have a bad feeling I'm going to piss off some of those investments. All of that said, the base pay here isn't far from what I'm paying myself with T3 chat. It's also a lot lower than what I pay my team. I want to keep paying my team. So we're going to take a real quick break for today's sponsors, and then we'll dive right in. I talk to a lot of businesses, and I've seen them make so many different mistakes, but there's one in particular that's really hard to come back from: bad hiring. Be it bringing a recruiter in too early, hiring a team that's way too big for what you're building, or just hiring people that aren't very good at what you need them to be good at. It is impossible to find good candidates right now. And even if you do, are you hiring them for the right thing? Do you actually need them for a full-time engineering role? It's hard to know, and getting this right sucks. That's why today's sponsor is so helpful. G2I has made it way easier to hire. They're the first hiring platform that's as flexible as you need to be for your business, especially you early stage startup people. Whether you need an incredible principal mobile engineer for 3 months to help you rebuild your app, or you just want a small team of experienced developers to help maintain your infrastructure over time, whatever you're looking for, these guys can help you find it. Their video interview platform is so cool. They already have 8,000 experienced engineers in their network, and they'll take care of you and make sure you're talking to the people that you should be. You tell them what you're looking for, you write some questions, and then they send those to the candidates, and you can review them in their video platform, just like you're doing a real interview, but way, way faster. Filtering out the noise isn't even necessary because they already did that, but now you just pick between the highest signal for what you're looking for. They aim to go from first interview to first PR in under a week, and I've seen them do this multiple times now. It's kind of insane. It's kind of crazy, but ShotMonkey was able to hire 17 people in 60 days with G2I without having to compromise on quality at all. You're not going to find anything like these guys elsewhere. If you're ready to hire the best possible way, check them out now at soydev.link/G2I. This offer is atrocious. Let's break down the parts really quick. So we got $60K salary, 0.5% equity, based in SF, basically a co-founder, without worrying about dilution. God, the sheer volume of red flags here is hard to put into words. This also came with the context from the original post of average YC startup offer. I feel like I want to jump in front of that bit first, because none of this, okay, the equity part would be not unlikely in a YC offer, but everything else here, no, that's not happening in a YC offer. The floor for salaries I'm seeing for these YC startups for in-person, reminder, is around 125K. And then everything else they say here is just fucking nonsense. So let's go through this piece by piece. First, let's do this by talking about the startup itself. Startup journey. Step 1, person or people want to build a thing. This could be you and some friends from work. It could be some friends from high school or college. It could be your loved one. It could be your cousin. It could be whoever. It starts with the desire to build a thing. A mistake I'll often see is going the wrong way here, where they have the team, but they don't have any idea what they want to build. That's fine, but figure that out first. It's better to build the wrong thing than to not know what to build. Go build the wrong thing, learn those lessons, figure out if these people are worth working with or not, and then do the next step. So usually, you have a thing you want to build. Usually, you'll start building the thing. There are some exceptions here. They're not worth necessarily getting into right now. Video for another time, perhaps. Then you have to ask yourself an important question. Can this eventually be worth $1 billion? If the answer to that question is yes, cool, we can continue. If the answer to that question is no, awesome, you just made a lifestyle business. Go run that one as far as you can. Don't talk to investors. Don't call it a startup. It's not. It's a lifestyle business. That's fine. You can make a lot of money building bespoke tools that can make millions of dollars a year that aren't worth billions, because investors aren't looking to make a 2x return on a startup investment. They're looking to lose their money most of the time and 10 to 100x at some of the time to balance it out. That's how investing works in early stage, because the harsh reality is that 99% of these companies fail. That isn't they get acquired, that is they fail. The majority of the money that's going into these VC-backed companies goes to zero. That's just the reality of startups. You have to want the thing badly enough to ignore the stats and go do it anyways. And if you get into YC or something like that, awesome. It helps a lot. 95% of YC companies fail. To be fair, failure for YC companies looks different. I think it's around, don't quote me on this number. I think it's like 50% go to zero, roughly. 10 to 20 get buyouts for low vals. 10 to 20 have weird states and just things can get weird in startups. And then 5% eventually reach that $1 billion valuation, roughly. Varies a lot based on year, based on batch, based on technology types, based on team, based on a lot of things. But the YC value add is the 5 to 50x the likelihood you have $1 billion exit just by having that associated with your brand. It's significantly, like if you get into YC, there's a significantly higher chance you're successful than if you make a startup without it. It's also worth noting that at this point in time, 0% of non-YC accelerators have had a $1 billion plus exit, which means all of the alternatives to YC that you could get into instead, they don't seem to add anything because right now their hit rate is literally zero. None of them have had a successful exit. None of them should be considered, in my opinion. I don't want to name drop. I don't want to talk about the alternatives. I just want to point out the reality in which non-YC accelerators have an abysmal hit rate. YC has an industry-leading hit rate. Be considerate of that. Regardless, not what we're here to talk about. What we're here to talk about is assuming you can be worth $1 billion, you raise. Maybe YC, maybe mistake, maybe straight to the bigger firms. To be clear, there's a difference between an accelerator and traditional VC. An accelerator is like a program you go through, kind of like a boot camp for startups to make connections, have peers, learn a bunch about how startups work, and sprint to the finish. Or you can just raise money from traditional firms like the Sequoias, Anderson Horowitz's, Accels. So many more of these firms exist. But then you don't get that hands-on acceleration that can help a lot with these startups. It's a huge part of why YC companies are so good. All of the people at YC aren't just VC bros. They're all founders, most of which have exited. They understand how actually running a company works, unlike investors that like to talk about it a whole bunch. So you start building, you identify this could be worth $1 billion, you raise money, maybe you go through YC, maybe you go to some of these other firms. You now have a business that is ready to go. You don't have the business yet. You have the pieces to assemble it. A big mistake I'll see, and it's very common, a lot of people treat the fundraise as the accomplishment for the company. Like they are successful because they raised. No. It's like saying you won F1 because you showed up with a fancy car. It's just so far from the actual thing. It's literally just the ahead of time prep. So now you've raised the money, you have the start of a product, you're ready to go. Now the actual work starts. This actual work includes a lot of pieces, one of which is hiring. And here's where the hot takes start. Most startups hire wrong, just like outright, like not even close to doing it correctly. I can't tell you how often I see this. There's a bunch of different types of fundraising failures that I see. The most common is what I like to call cosplaying startups. Or cosplaying big companies, I guess is a better way of putting it. This is when you see what other companies are doing. You see somebody like Cursor that's blowing up. They're really successful. They are killing it. Suddenly they have 3 offices instead of 1. Suddenly they're hiring a bunch of people. Suddenly they're acquiring things that are kind of competitors, kind of not. You see all of that. You see their fancy marketing videos and all the cool things they're doing. And you're like, okay, successful companies are doing that, so I'm going to do it too. You got your order of events wrong. The cart before the horse is very common in the space. The horse was running. The company was doing well. They had endless users coming in. They were making a lot of money. Things were growing like mad. They begrudgingly started to do those things because they kind of had to due to the speed at which things were accelerating. But they didn't hire to make themselves grow faster. They were growing so fast that they had to hire. Very, very common mistake I see in the space. There's also hiring for what you hate. This is the one that pisses me off the most because to be fair, I didn't get this initially either, but it's so obvious to me now that when I see people screwing it up, it hurts me. Most of us are engineers, right? Like the people hanging out in chat, we all write code for a living. Who's had a manager that didn't write code? Where you were the technical person on the team, but your boss wasn't. You wrote code, but your boss didn't understand code. Let's see some me's in chat quick. Raise your hands, drop ones, say me. Want to see who's experienced this. You'd be surprised how many people have never experienced this. People showing up. Scale of 1 to 10, how awful was it? Drop a number or explain how much you suffered. You can give me a sentence. You can describe it. I got a couple 7s. We got a 9,000. We got a 10,000. 8, 7, 11, 8.1. I'd rather use Flutter. Quit the job. Some people saying it was okay, but other people saying it caused post-traumatic stress disorder for them. It's not fun. The one nice point is that you can sometimes lie to them about the job. That's actually a really, really important piece, Jag, and I'm happy you brought that up. There's a couple problems with hiring for what you don't like doing. The biggest by far is that you're going to be a shit boss. We're all technical. We've all had the moment where we spent 2 weeks overhauling some really annoying, painful thing. We finally get it working. We finally unblock ourselves. We're going to make things way easier for the team. We're so pumped about this work we did. And we have our one-on-one with our manager. We're like, oh, we did it. I just spent 2 weeks figuring this out. This was so hard. I'm really proud of the solution I made. To which your manager says, oh, that's cool. Can you get that ticket closed already? It's been there for 2 weeks. It's the worst feeling ever to be so invested in the solution to the problem and to not have that energy matched by the other side. It will take great people and churn them so fast. It's unbelievable. Ugh. Can't tell you how many times I've seen this throughout my career. I've been lucky that a vast majority of my managers have been very, very technical and also very hyped on the stuff I do. Honestly, many of them lived vicariously through me because they were so hyped about the work I was doing. That's the best. When you have a manager that wishes they could do the job that you're doing, so they're constantly asking you questions that are actually fun to talk about. They get hyped on the things you're excited about. They will go play with your changes. They'll look at the code. They'll be excited with you about it. That's the best. Those are the most important managers I've had in my career, the ones that are matching your energy and pushing you even further with it. So what happens if you're a technical founder and you're hiring for sales? What happens if you're a non-technical founder and you're hiring engineers? What happens when you're hiring for roles that you don't like and often don't even respect? You become a shit manager at an increasingly shit company. Every single time, almost without fail. So what I recommend doing is hire for the thing you love as a founder. I love writing code. So all of the hires at our company are engineers. So I can go focus on all the other shit that I have to do. My CTO, Mark, loves support. He's been deep in the support trenches for most of his career. So he needs to start hiring for support so we can do everything else we have to do. We're hiring for what we love so we can go focus on the shit that we don't love yet in hopes that we can get good enough at it that we'll kind of miss it. The best time to hire for something is when it's distracting you and you'll miss it when you stop doing it. I cannot tell you guys how much I miss doing all my thumbnails and editing my videos. I love doing that type of work. I don't get to anymore because it's not the right place for me to use my time. Instead, I'm living vicariously through Ben, who's making a lot of the thumbnails and helping with a lot of the sponsor stuff, and with FaZe, my editor. We talk about fun editing techniques and random plugins and things we find all the time. It's so fun. Hi, FaZe. Hanging out here as always. I like to think I'm a much better boss now than I was for my previous editors because I didn't like editing when I had them. Now that I love editing, I can live vicariously through FaZe. And he even says he loves watching those rare edits when I do my one video a month, when I do get to do a little bit of editing. You gotta love what you're hiring for. So these are the most common mistakes that I see. Another really common one, hiring how you raise. This is a very common problem for startups. They spend so much time in this step 4 where they are fucking fighting VCs to get money into their bank account that it rots their brain a bit. And then when they're done with that part, their brain has been so rotted by VC that they're pitching everything the way they pitch to VCs. They're not pitching it the way you would pitch to a potential employee. They're not pitching to the way you'd pitch a customer. They have been so brain rotted by VCs, they don't know how to talk about the thing that they're doing anymore. So painfully common. I like that people in chat are relating to this. It's very bizarre. You were interviewing the founder. Yeah, exactly. This feeling that you're interviewing them, not they're interviewing you, is weirdly common. I see this very often. So as a result, a lot of startups hire really poorly. There's another important problem here, which is that most founders have never hired before. Some founders are fresh out of college. Some founders were ICs at a company, just contributing code directly, never managing employees. Some of them have pivoted between industries and never ran a team before. The majority of startups are being run by people who don't know how to run a team yet. That doesn't mean they won't figure it out. In fact, some of the best leaders I know fell into this position as a founder type role, like Luke from LTT. He did not join LTT with a bunch of engineering experience as well as management experience, and now he manages dozens, if not hundreds of employees. He grew into the role. You can absolutely do that. But that's one of the things that you need to expect when you join one of these companies, is that you'll be teaching them how to manage as much as they'll be teaching you how to build. And that back and forth, that relationship, the give and take there, is an essential part of a startup. Everyone is growing. Everyone is fucking up. Everyone's learning together. Good point from Christian here. Any startup that pitches the company funding specific product details instead of the team, probably not the best place to work. So most startups are hiring wrong. The cosplaying big companies part in particular is brutal because they hire way too many people and then don't have anything for them to do. And then they have to downscale when they realize they're not making enough money and can't afford to keep paying them. Chaos. So let's go through the mindset of someone who is hiring after doing the raise, starting to build, and realizing they need more employees. We're going to good faith it a bit. We're going to assume they're not necessarily making as many of these mistakes. So now we're hiring. I'm just going to give numbers for as average an average YC startup as I can fathom. Just like straight middle of the road numbers here. YC gives you $500K with kind of weird terms. The terms are that 7% goes for $125K. The other $375K is an MFN. MFN, bit complex. I talked about it before. It means most favored nation. It means that whatever the best deal you give somebody else in the future is, it matches that. That said, $500K is enough to pay a couple people a year or two. Then you're out of money, especially if you're paying all these crazy AI bills too. That's just not going to sustain jack shit. So that's the YC deal. That's not what matters for a YC company. What matters for the YC company is the raise at the end of the batch, the demo day raise. After the 3-month in-person YC program, you get thrown in front of a bunch of investors to pitch your company. The funny part is that the majority of those companies have already finished their raise before the pitch. Demo day is such a strong lever that investors have learned they have to get in before if they want to get to these best companies. So a lot of these companies have already finished their rounds, and it's almost like a bragging rights thing or networking for future raises when they do demo day. But it's also an opportunity for the companies that aren't leading the batch to get a little bit of money before they like the YC thing ends. So straight down the middle average is that a totally average YC company has raised $2 million at around a $20 million valuation. It's not a real valuation, to be clear. This is a valuation cap for a safe equity investment. I've talked about that a lot in other videos. I'm not going to do it here. This is effectively 10% of the company gone. It's actually a bit worse because the 125K is 7%. So it's 10% for the 2 mil at 20 effectively. But since 125 is worse, it's probably closer to 15% of the company has now been sold to investors. So if you have the company, this is all of the company's equity. And before, this is your equity. So the employees or the founders have 100% of the equity. We'll say that there are 10 million shares. Before this raise, 100% of the equity is owned by the founders. Since it's under a safe, this is still technically not real equity. It's an IOU, but once that converts, it doesn't take away from the other investors. They're not taking my shares. I still have my 10 million shares, or in my case, it's 5 million split between Mark and me. So we both have 5 mil. When the investors get their stock, they don't take our shares. New shares are created. So it'd be like 1.1 mil shares in order to make sure it's still 10%. Another 1.1 mil shares will be created, that is the 10% that goes to investors. That means we've been diluted. We're no longer 100%. We still have 10 million shares, but we're now at 90% of the equity. That's the difference. This is what dilution means, by the way. It's when new shares are created, your shares become a smaller percentage of the company. You might have noticed that the original thing said that you won't have to worry about dilution. This is co-founders, the original founders here, worrying about dilution. That statement is literally just a lie. Anyways, so it's not 10%, it's probably gonna be closer to 15 to 20 post-YC. So what's left is 85% of the equity that the founders own. Usually you think about this a little different though. So instead of the founders having 100% and then getting diluted, the founders have 90%, so it's the 9 mil shares would be theirs. But then there's a little bit cut off at the end between 5 and 10. And this part is the options pool. It's usually between 5 and 10%. We'll say it's 10% for the sake of this. This is equity that is saved and allocated for future hiring. So if you bring on a new employee, they're going to come from here. If it's Series C, you're granting stock, you're probably granting it from here. If you run out of the options pool, you have to again issue new stock to have more. So most companies try to avoid it. Generally speaking, around 10% of your company's stock from the start is reserved for employees going forward. This is important. So remember that over the history of the company, roughly 10% in the best case, the most equity going to employees, 10% goes to employees total. And that 10% still gets diluted. That 10% has to be split over time. But you have to be very careful about this because it's not trivial to get more stock. If you give out all 10%, you're fucked because you have to take dilution to give out more stock. So generally you try to extend this. So every round you give half of what's left. So pre-Series A, you give up 2.5 to 5%. Now you're left with 7.5 to 5. Series A to B, you give up another 2.5%. Series B to C, you give up 1.25, and you keep reducing how much you're giving up because hypothetically that percentage is worth way more money. Because 10% of 20 mil is a lot less than 5% of 2 billion. So back to this hypothetical company we're talking about. 2 mil at a 20 mil valuation. They have diluted around 15%. They have 2 mil in the bank, and they have a goal. Series A in 3 years or less. So they have 3 years or less to get to their next raise. Generally speaking, you plan with a year or at least 6 months of buffer. So we'll say they're planning for 3 years, but they want to raise within 2.5. You should have enough money in the bank to survive all 3 years. So that's 2 mil over 3 years. That's around 600K a year of burn. This company can lose 600K a year and still make it to Series A, hopefully, as long as they can raise at that point. But if they can't, they're fucked. So the goal is to spend 600K or less a year to make the company look as good as possible and be as set up for success as possible so that you can raise a next round at a hypothetically higher valuation, because that Series A, if all goes well, might be another 10 mil at a 150 mil valuation. Maybe it's 20 mil at 150 mil valuation. Totally reasonable numbers to expect. That'd be another 13% dilution, roughly. But now you have 20 mil in the bank, and suddenly you go from being able to spend 600K a year to being able to spend 6 mil a year. That's a huge difference, again, going with the 3-year window. So the goal here is to get through all the stages, not run out of money, and look as good as possible for the next potential investor. So now let's think about hiring here. We can only spend 600K a year. Let's say you have 2 co-founders. So founder A makes 150K a year. Founder B makes 150K a year. Office costs 70K a year. And you spend, 15K a year on operation BS. Things like paying your lawyers, dealing with taxes, and all of that shit. We're already at, 385K spend before we even have employees. The founders could pay themselves less, not much less though. And SF rent has skyrocketed again due to the AI bubble. Rent in the city right now is upwards of 3.5K for a decent studio apartment. It's not uncommon for founders to pay themselves less, but if you are struggling to make rent, that's no good for anyone. Even if we bump that down to 100, which is the lowest I would reasonably live in SF for at this point, that still is 285K of spend. Even best case, lowering your salaries quite a bit. You could cut the office and just pay yourselves more. Honestly, not the worst case. But I see a lot of people spending even more than that for their office early stage. It's pretty sad. We'll make a more responsible version. Just let's, again, we're trying to best faith. So we'll say $20K a year for the office spend. Honestly, $15K a year on lawyers and operations is probably low too. I'm going to bump that to 25 to be even more reasonable there. Okay, so now we're at $245K a year of spend. This is like being reasonable and founders being a little cheap with how much they're paying themselves. I was paying myself way less. I paid a lot of my other founders way more. Depends on how you want to do things. So now we have $245K to spend, which leaves us at most $355K a year budget left over. A lot of that's going to go to paying for AI inference. A lot of that's going to go for servers. A lot of places that you're going to spend this money. But let's just hypothetically say that's all going to go to employees. I personally would not recommend anyone pay an in-person SF employee less than $125K a year. Absolute minimum. So we are at best 3 employees there. When you consider all the other expenses of employing somebody, it's like 2 to maybe 2.5. Maybe 2.5. We'll say 2 to be reasonable here. So at $125K a year, you can have 2 employees at these general reasonable numbers for 3 years before you need to raise more money. This is why founders want to pay less. Because if instead of $125K a year, you paid $60K a year, you can go from 2 employees to like 5 or 6. So if you scam them with $60K a year, suddenly you can have like 5+ employees easily. But you have something else as the founder. You have your money that you raise is in your bank account, but you also have equity. You have that 10% pool that you reserved earlier. So if you are low on cash and want to hold it for as long as you can, instead of giving a lot of cash, give more options. So you give them $125K with a small percentage, or you give them $60K with a high percentage and tell them, oh, this will be worth so much money. For a lot of reasons, don't do that. This offer's atrocious, but we'll get to all those details in just a bit. Hopefully this helps you understand why founders would want to pay less. Is not just because they're scammers, it's because they want the company to last longer and potentially have more employees. By paying you less, because they're not making money. YC companies don't have an increasing amount of money in their bank account every month. They have less money in their bank account every month. They are burning money. They're not just being greedy. They're trying to plan their survival. They are being stupid, though. I'm not here to say they're not being dumb. I'm just here to say that they're not as malicious as you think. They're just not that good at this yet because they're learning as they go. None of them have any real experience. Another really good thing that Dogpaw Hat pointed out is if you hire 2 people at 60, you just added more years of runway. Huge deal. If you think outsourcing, I saw a lot of people saying that, what about outsourcing? If you think outsourcing is a solution, you don't understand how early stage works at all. At all. No. No one outsourced their successful startup. You can't do that. No. You outsource the legal team. You outsource your freaking accountants and shit. You don't outsource the actual building of the product. That's just obvious. I don't know how to be kind about how dumb that is. It's just dumb. It is. So what went wrong all the way back up here? Let's break down all of the parts here that I hate. I'm going to move this piece to the bottom for reasons we'll get to in a bit. First, we have the $60K salary. This plus based in SF, fucking bullshit. Rent alone is going to be more than half of this. Also covering food, covering general living and transport costs, covering clothes and furniture for your new apartment in the city, covering the inevitable theft and car break-ins if you actually make the mistake of bringing a car. Don't have a car in SF if you can avoid it. It'll make life way harder. $60K salary in SF it was bad 5 years ago when rent was cheaper. It is basically untenable at this point in time. And if these companies are hiring remote, they're not doing their jobs very well. Remote does not allow for the level of flexibility that early stage needs. The amount of shared context, the amount of pivoting, the amount of important conversation that happens in person at these companies is really, really important. And you cannot make that work over Slack or Discord. There are early stage companies that have had success going all remote, and every single one of them said it's the hardest thing they ever did, and if you don't have to, you shouldn't do it. We were largely remote with Ping, and I've been going out of my way to get our team here. If all goes well, Julius will be moved to SF very, very soon after a grueling, painful, slow process with getting a visa. It helps so much to have your team in person. I spent a lot of money getting Ben, my channel manager, moved out here so that we could move faster on the channel. If you're building a startup and trying to move fast, remote is a hit that isn't necessarily worth taking. When you're making a startup and you're trying to make it successful, you should try your best to game all of the odds in your favor. If you're trying to roll a 6 with dice, and you can choose how many dice you have in your hand, you want to have more dice because your goal is to roll a single 6. Adding more dice just increases your odds. If you don't like one of the dice, yeah, you can throw it out, but you just hurt your odds of success. This is why I don't take companies outside of SF very seriously. I've had the opportunity to invest in some startups that aren't SF based, and I'm super skeptical because SF significantly increases your chances of succeeding as a startup. I've had the chance to invest in companies that turned down a YC offer, and I immediately rejected them because they're not doing the cost-benefit analysis properly in their head. I don't want to invest in a company that isn't doing everything they can to increase the likelihood of success. And hiring remote employees is an immediate hit to the likelihood of success. We can argue if it's 1%, 5%, 10%, or 50%. I don't care. It is objectively a hit. And if you can avoid taking it, you should. If you can spend more money to avoid that hit, do it. But if there's an exceptional, unbelievable person that you know will accelerate the thing that you are doing, you couldn't be more positive. You can't imagine the company without them. Maybe bring them in as a contractor for a bit and see how it goes. But the lack of in-person collaboration, context sharing, the flexibility and the understanding, and most importantly, the ability to disagree and make amends and just build a close bond with the team. Like early stage, I know the family thing is cringe. It's the best thing I can describe here, not because you should treat the company like a family, but families can fight and bounce back. You need to be able to go through hard shit together, and it becomes significantly easier when you are in person and able to build these relationships. And no amount of cringe fucking Zoom hangouts is going to be the same thing. You need to just know the people. So the based NSF part absolutely makes sense. I would argue it's almost essential at this point. I've helped a lot of founders move employees over to the US, move employees over to SF from other places. Startups are a long, grueling battle. It's a long journey. And having the people with you in person helps so much. Not because you can micromanage them, not so you can breathe over their neck when they're coding, but so you can go out and get a beer after a really hard battle is won, or so you have somebody there to commiserate with you when you just lost a sale you fought really hard for, or so you have your team there to fucking support you on your goddamn birthday after you burn yourself out for fundraising 3 weeks straight. Definitely haven't been there. Definitely didn't close my round on my fucking birthday and then lie down as my team breaks into my room to shake me and congratulate me for being fucking done finally. That's why you need your team in person. It helps so much. And giving that up because, well, remote employees are cheaper. No, fuck that shit. Be real here. Speaking of being real here, basically a co-founder, no, fuck you. Absolutely not. If you're not there for the raise, if you're not on the table with over 10%, if you don't have over 10% equity, you're not a fucking founder, and anything suggesting it is bad. I don't even like the title founding engineer for this reason. It doesn't properly represent the role. I hate that. Don't tell somebody they're basically a co-founder. You either are or you're not. I fell into this trap. It's preying on people who don't know better to an extent. To be fair, I think these founders don't know it better either. I straight up don't know if this text is fake or not. It very well could be. But a lot of these early stage founders are just they get it heavily in some places. They don't get it at all in others. And they're pitching this to you through their mindset of just getting through a fundraise, but also thinking of you as where they were 6 months ago. If they were 6 months back in time, didn't have a startup that could potentially do well, but knew everything they knew now, this is an offer that they would have been excited about because they are stupid and wrong. And now they are pitching something stupid and wrong because they don't know any better. It's the brain rot of the mindset they have from just doing the raise. Because let's go back to that 20 mil number. So there's a 20 mil val cap and there's 0.5% equity. That's a lot of money. That's $100K still. And the reason this matters isn't because they're handing you $100,000. It's because they could have sold that same equity and put $100K in the bank. This is a company that in most of these cases just raised a bunch of money against a valuation like this. So they're not thinking in 0.5%. They're thinking in that's $100K. But if the next round is, 200 mil, now it's 1 mil. It's a little less because of dilution. We'll talk about how this gets diluted in a bit. But they're seeing this as an opportunity to make a lot more, the same way investors do. An investor would be really excited to get 0.5% of this company. Usually this equity also is on a vesting schedule, a 4-year schedule with a 1-year cliff. That's just how investing almost always works. So you get nothing if you get fired or you leave within the first year. But if you wait a year, you now have 25% of your equity. And then every month you get slightly more until 4 years pass. So yeah, we'll talk about that amount of equity in a bit because I want to complain about the dilution thing first. Everyone gets diluted. This was actually a mistake I made with my initial offers with Ping because I didn't know how dilution worked really. I was still so early. And a lot of these founders don't understand dilution yet. So if we go back here with this section, previously, the founders owned 85%, and then 15% goes to this new equity. Now they raise 20 mil on 200 mil. Suddenly, there's a lot more money in the company. But also, this is a priced round. This is money that is turning into shares immediately. So that gets added as another 10% at the end here, which means all of this gets shrunk. The 15% from before becomes 13% now. And the 85% before also shrinks. Because about 76%. You still have your 10 million shares. It's just that another bunch of shares were just introduced. I'll say it's another 1 mil. Just like rough napkin math, you get the idea. Everyone gets hit with dilution. Even though the company went from 20 mil to 200 mil, the equity is a smaller percentage. This is still a really good thing because this 10 million shares was worth 17 mil at the time. And now those same 10 million shares are worth 152 mil, even though it's a smaller percentage. So yes, you're getting diluted, but you are also theoretically worth a lot more money at that point too. Apparently people thought that only the founders get diluted. That's not how it works at all. Everybody with shares gets diluted. The way dilution works is there's a pot of shares. There's, let's say, 10 million. You have 1 million, I have 4 million, whatever. We all have shares, and they are percentages of the total pot, 10 mil. When a fundraise happens, we're not all giving up some of our shares. New shares are added. We no longer have 10 mil. We now have 11 mil, then 12 mil, then 14 mil. And every time new shares are added, our shares become a smaller percentage. Eventually, this company might have 20 million shares or 200 million shares, and people get diluted every step along the way. So if you back up here, have 0.5%, that would be 500,000 shares. Oh, it's 50,000, not 500,000. My bad. That's the mistake I made. It's 50K shares. Cool. Sorry. Brain fart. So you have 50K shares. You still have 50K shares, but that's now a smaller percentage. That's now 0.413% roughly. But that's not a bad number against 200 million. Because now you went from about 100,000 to about 826,000 in 2 to 3 years. And if this company does end up doing really well, and they end up raising 100 mil on a 1.5 billion valuation, more dilution's about to hit for sure. I'm not going to do the percentages here because it's too much work to keep updating. So you got the 10 million shares for the founders, 1.1 mil for investment 1, 1 mil for investment 2, and then your measly 50K hanging out wherever it is. I'm going to make these numbers easier for me. 150 mil, 1.5 bill. Now it's going to be 1.2 roughly because 10% of what the post-money value, just annoying math. Close enough. You get the idea. So now there are 13.3 mil total shares. You still have the same 50K. So now you're down to 0.38%. But if you take that percent and multiply it by 1.5 billion, you're now worth almost $6 million. That's the key. You are diluted. Your percentage has gone down. You went from 0.5% to 0.413 to 0.3816 or whatever. But you went from 100K of equity to 826K to 6 mil. When and how the company hits these stages varies, and the likelihood a company hits these stages varies even more, which is the thing we'll talk about in a little bit. The point I'm trying to make here is that your dilution happens, but you're also still making a lot more money. And this is where the hot take comes in that a lot of people are upset about, but I don't really care. It's reality. I'm going to get flamed so hard for this. I already have been, so I'm just going to eat it. 0.5% is totally acceptable for an early hire. I know how this sounds. I know what you guys are thinking when you see this. I must be super greedy and delusional and terrible, right? No, hear me out. Remember earlier when we were talking about the employee pool, that roughly 10%, so in this case, 1 million shares is reserved for employees over time? That's over the life of the company. So we have these 1 million shares that hopefully will be enough to cover all employees going forward. So if we make these 2 really early hires at 0.5%, we now have 2 people totaling 100K shares. We've already lost a tenth of the company's lifetime shares for giving to employees. On top of that, when the founders got their equity, when Mark and I got our 50%, the valuation for T3 was around $82. So we both got 50% of $82, which meant that we both got $40 roughly of equity. When these employees are coming in, they're getting over $100,000 of equity because the thing is no longer worth $80. It's now valuation cap worth, like paper value, but still, it's now worth $100K each. So that's $200,000 of equity, which is more than you would get at most companies. But there's a huge difference here too. When you get $100K of stock at Amazon, best case, you maybe 2x. I was that best case. I joined Twitch right as Amazon was acquiring Twitch, and Amazon was having a not great quarter. So I got about, I think it was 80 or 90K of equity granted over 4 years. And it more than doubled by the time I was at the end of that 4 year. My total comp looked way better than a lot of my peers because I came in at the right time where my equity was worth jack shit. But then as it went up, it ended up being worth quite a bit more. That's normal company world stuff. So just for comparison's sake, here's what my offer looked like at Twitch. It was like 125K a year base. It was X number of shares, which at the time was worth around 90K over 4 years. And again, a cliff, which means you don't get any equity for the first year. And then every either quarter or month, you get a grant, but you get the whole first year of equity right at the 1 year mark. So you get 25% of this right at the 1 year, and then you get another month's worth or quarter's worth until the 4 year mark is hit. Which means when I hit my 4 year mark at Twitch, my salary dropped a ton because by the time I was 4 years in, this 90K of equity was suddenly worth like 200K instead. So that added a lot of money to my base salary effectively. So this is a common offer at a traditional company. This is also, again, for an early stage junior-ish engineer. I'll say this is a year one. Let's talk about year two, though. Year two, I got a promotion and a raise. So now I'm making 200K a year base. I still have this equity vesting, but I'm given a grant of another probably 10K over 2 years. And this is a grant I'm getting as part of my promotion. Notice how much less this is than the original offer. That's very common. On top of that, the company's now worth more. So this 10%, or so this 10K is fewer shares than the 90K divided by 9 would have been. And this is what ends up happening at these big companies. As the stock value goes up, they can't compensate you as much with equity anymore, so they just bump your base salary. So suddenly I'm making 280K a year base, and I get an equity grant, and the equity grant is another like 8K of stock over 2 years again. Cool. It's jack shit. So if this first time I got 90,000 shares and the stock's doubled, I'm not getting 10,000 shares here. I'm getting 5,000. And then if the stock 1.5x's again, I'm not getting 4,000 here. I'm getting like 3,000 at best, maybe less, maybe like 2,500. So at this big company that pays really well, my base salary is going up, but the amount of more money I make year over year is going down significantly. This is how traditional, real big companies work. Very common. I got lucky getting in at such a low valuation, but it like 2 to 3x'd. I then sold all of that stock and used that money to fund my startup, which is how we could get started in the first place. This prior equity was worth a lot more, which made my total comp look much better, but I wasn't getting much in terms of a raise. My raise was just coming from my previous equity being worth more money than it was before versus a startup. Let's compare this to what we're talking about here. Again, I don't fucking believe in the slightest in that 60K a year starting point. So we're going to change this a bit. It's still going to be 0.5% of shares, but we're going to use the real numbers here. We're going to pretend there's 10 mil. So this is 50K shares, and that's 100K over 4 years. I'm going to actually do the math here for the like equity value changing. So we'll say at this point, it's 1x, then 1.5x, then 2x for the stock value. My total comp here is going to be around, what is that? 210, 215K? Yeah, cool. So 215K is my total comp then. Year two, I'm going to change it to 100K just to make the numbers easier. So 100K divided by 4, 125 plus 25 is 150K. Cool. Year two, we're getting an additional 10K over 2 years, but we also have the 25K for this year times 1.5 because it's now worth more. So year two, my total comp is 37.5 plus the new 2.5 plus, what did I say my base is now? 150. Cool. So now I'm making a total of 190K a year. And now we have year 3. And here we're assuming it's all 2x'd. So the 2.5K, or no, that wouldn't have been 2.5, that would have been 5. I did some bad math there. Yeah, so that's another 2.5. So another 182.5, because like over 2 years, that means you're getting a 5K of, or a year of new equity. And then the other one's old equity. They're 192.5K a year. Cool. Now you get another big raise this time to 280K a year, $80,000 of additional base cash, 8K of stock over 2 years. That's another 4K of equity, plus the 5K a year that went from 1.5 to 2. So 2 divided by 1.5 is, 1.3 times 5, 6.6K of last year equity, plus the 25K times 2 equals 50K equity. So now our total comp is $340,000. And that's not a bad glow up, but a lot of that glow up came from previous equity now being worth more money. These are fake numbers, but they're really close to the numbers I had when I worked at Twitch. Effectively going from 150K a year total comp to 350K a year total comp in 3 years. And that was really good luck more than anything. Oh, I missed the 200K base. I did that math wrong too. Cool. I really fucked that up. Cool. Okay, so we have the 200K a year base plus the 5K of new equity plus the 37.5. Okay, so that would have been 242. That was bad on my part. Thank you for the catch. I missed the 200K there. Cool. So we went from 150 to 242 to 340, about 100K a year of raise. But a lot of that came from the multipliers here. A lot of it also came from the 80-ish K base increases. I kind of killed it after my first year at Twitch, so I was able to increase my salary quite a bit. The problem was that my equity had gone up so much that the equity compensation was being factored in. So my next year, I didn't get jack shit for a cash bonus. Year 4, I was still at 280K. I got a tiny bit more equity, but not much. And my salary had kind of plateaued and relied entirely on the stock going up. So let's go back to this startup. Year 1, 125K a year base, 50K shares, 100K of shares over 4 years. So that's 25K shares this first year. So your total is around 150K. And now, year 2. Let's say the company hasn't raised more money yet. They can't justify paying you more yet. So still 125K. Equity, you don't get a new stock grant or anything, so it's still 50K shares, still 25K shares, still 150K. But those shares can't be sold the same way Amazon stock can. You're just kind of sitting on them. So you now have 25K of shares, but it's not cashed yet. You can't do anything with it. Year 3 hits. Year 3, the company raised. Suddenly they can justify paying you more. You're up to 175K a year. Still not great. Pretty good though. They also don't change your equity grant at all. So you still have the 50K shares over 4 years, but there's a difference now. That was at a 20 mil val. Now we're at a 200 mil val. So if we do the multiplier here, 1x, 1x, 10x. Now those 50K shares are worth around 1 mil over 4 years. There is dilution, so I'll even factor in the dilution. We'll say that's 900K over 4 years. Cool. Suddenly, that 25K shares isn't 25K shares every 4 years. It's now 225K shares a year. So your base salary just went way higher. Now you're at 400K a year. But what's even crazier is you were holding these shares because you couldn't sell them. So the other 50K of shares that you had is 50% of the 900K. And so that stock from before is now another 450K of equity you're sitting on. Yeah, that's the difference. If you wanted to look at the total amount made at the bottom of this 3-year chart, you have the 125K base times 2, plus the 175 times 1, plus the 900K times 3/4, say 75%. You made a total in 3 years of almost $1 million. We do the same here. Even if we assume you didn't sell the equity, you end up at around 772K. And I want to be clear, I lucked out at Twitch to have done that well. So in 3 years, startup makes almost $1 million. Twitch, 800K. Where things get really fucked is year 4. Because suddenly you're payout at this company is significantly higher. And at Twitch, mine almost went down. Our new base here is $400K a year, and that maintains. On top of that, you're sitting on the equity, and that equity could very well 10x again, which would mean that $900K is now worth 9 mil. The potential upside is insane. The best case here is what I showed. I had a best case scenario at Amazon, and I made a good bit of money that I then spent to make my company. But if we were to knock these multipliers down and assume you're not getting an $80K a year cash raise every year, this would be closer to like $400 to $500K. But this is the calculations you need to do when you're thinking this out. And when I talk to startup founders that are making these offers, I explicitly tell them, don't put a percentage in. Percentages make people's brains fall out. Imagine if you got a percentage of how much equity you were getting working at Amazon. Here's my Amazon offer. You're going to make $125K a year, and you're going to get 0.000000021% equity. Cool. Obviously, no one does that. But you need to talk about this in terms of what this could be worth in the future. At a company like Amazon, maybe 2x's. At a company like an early stage startup, maybe 10 to 100x's. So of the things here, the only parts I can defend are the based in SF, because early stage startups should have their team in one place, and SF's the best place to succeed as a company right now. And the 0.5% equity, because that is enough equity, I just would never have pitched it this way. If you are a founder or a person hiring at one of these companies, pay close attention to this part. And if you're considering working at one of these companies, also pay attention to this part, because this is how they should be pitched. Here is what an offer that is good would look like. 125K a year base salary. It's not uncommon to say, we will give you another 50K a year at next raise, because we only have so much money in the bank. When we do our next raise, we'll have more money, and I commit to paying you more when that happens. When the money closes and we have it in our account, I will immediately give you a raise. I've seen this in a lot of offers. I've done this in my own offers. I think it's reasonable. And then you would say, you're also going to get 50,000 shares worth 100K right now. But let's play out some scenarios. We'll say scenario 1, this is the bad one. Company is worth 20 mil right now, 20 mil Val, but we have a bad sale. We sell the company for 10 mil. We raised 2 mil, which means that all gets liquidated immediately. So we lose the 2 mil from raising. That's how the safes work. Watch any of my other videos about the stuff if you want to understand that. So we have 8 mil left. It has to be split across the current shareholders. So if there's 8 mil left, there are 10 million shares at the company. I have some amount, my co-founder has some amount, you have 50,000. You get the 0.5% of the 8 mil, which is the bad scenario. That equals to 40K. You got kind of fucked. Well, let's look at scenario 2. Scenario 2, we end up raising at a 200 mil valuation, and we raise another 20 mil, 10% dilution. So now that equity you had is slightly less, so the 0.5% times 90%, because you're losing some of your value here, times the 200 mil, that's 900K for the equity. And it's not uncommon at this point for companies to allow for secondary sales, which means you can finally turn some of that equity into cash by selling it to some of those investors when they come in. You can do that if you want, whatever you feel like. But then scenario 3, let's say that this company ends up doing really well. Let's say 20 bill valuation, like a Stripe or a Cursor or something like that that does really, really well. That's going to be multiple raises down the line. So I'll be a little brutal with the dilution. We'll say these founders weren't good at keeping the rounds small percentage-wise, and you take a fucking 50% dilution hit. That's not worth $50 million. That is absurd. The scenario 2 with 10% dilution, I've seen it a decent bit. I've seen some rounds, like I just saw somebody raise 10 at 125. It's even less than that for a Series A. Like I've seen good rounds, but there have been a lot of people who fuck up round 2. So I'll 2.5 it. We'll say the same val, but we'll double the dilution. So you're at 80% left now. Cool. 800K. Fine. Slightly more realistic. A 20% dilution hit that stage. It kills me when I see it, but it does happen. Cool. Updated scenario 2. Scenario 3, we're much later in. You've taken a 50% dilution hit. Your stock's still worth $50 million. Fun fact, a lot of the current VC funds, like the companies that just do early stage investing, were early Stripe employees that got these 0.1 to 0.5% equity grants that now have a shitload of cash because Stripe did so well that they're now putting it into these early stage startups. But there's one last piece here that's important. And I know people hate this. The experience is valuable. There's a good experience on both the business side for like traditional, like working at Amazon or whatever, as well as working on a small startup. At the big business, you make a lot of important connections, especially if you're a great engineer. I kind of got known as the guy who made shit happen on all the teams I was on, all the teams that I touched. So when people heard I was starting a company, and a lot of my coworkers had the same crazy experience I did at Amazon that resulted in them having hundreds of thousands of dollars of cash in the bank, a lot of them were interested in funding my company. My early checks were almost entirely my ex-coworkers from Twitch and a couple people I went to college with. Those connections ended up being essential to us getting funded early. They got me the money I needed to survive long enough to then get into YC. That said, if you join a YC company, you are essential to them growing, and you can say, I helped scale some AI from 100K revenue all the way to 20 mil revenue. You can now get into YC without doing the early fundraise. We gave up 5% of our company doing an early raise before we got into YC so I'd have enough money to pay my rent. If I had done a startup instead, I would have had less money in my bank, likely, and it would have been harder for me to fund it myself, but I would have had the potential to skip that 5% I lost and get straight into YC. I can't tell you how many current YC companies I see that are a founding engineer from one of like the last 3 years of YC companies, leaving and going to do their own thing and getting in immediately because they have that experience and they understand the grind of the startup. There are benefits and negatives to both paths, and it should hopefully be pretty clear which one you specifically want to do. I'll go as far as saying the vast, vast majority of people should go the big company path, because there's one last piece that I've touched on but haven't emphasized enough. If this total is like a best case in big company world, we'll say that this is a 10% chance of happening. The worst case, the 90% case, even if we just say it's the actual worst potential here, it's probably going to be in the like 4 to 570 range. So if you're in the 90% of big companies that don't double year over year, you're still going to make a lot of money. But if we go here, this is a 5% chance at best. And there's a 95% chance that the equity all goes to zero and you only made your base salary, which would have been 125 times 2 plus 175. So it would have been 250, 320. So you would have made 425 instead, at best, because all your equity went to zero. This is the difference. In the best cases, the startup will win handedly. But in the worst cases, big business wins handedly. And most startups fail. Where 5% is YC numbers, reality is closer to like 1 or 2%. Obviously, you're gunning for this, assuming that you can make this happen. You shouldn't join a startup that you don't think can be worth $1 billion. The same way as an investor, you shouldn't invest in a startup that you don't see a path to $1 billion valuation. You shouldn't join a company you don't see a path there with either. There is one other important piece here, though, which is that in this 98% chance, you're now unemployed. And in this 90% chance, you're coasting. This was the case for a long time. Sadly, this has changed because of layoff culture. I legitimately believe that the rate of layoffs at these big companies and the randomness of the layoffs at these big companies means that the quality of your work and how hard you work no longer necessarily determines the likelihood you have a job next year at a big company. I know a lot of incredible engineers who got laid off because the company just ran an algorithm and it chose who to fire. If you're an early stage company at one of these startups and you work 2x harder, you might have just increased the chance the company succeeds by 20 to 50%. Harder work at this startup can meaningfully affect the percentage of success and failure. And even if it does fail, what you get out of that is a ramp to go start your own thing. If you work just as hard at a big company like Microsoft or Amazon, you don't materially impact the likelihood the company succeeds. You don't materially impact the likelihood they have to do layoffs. You don't even materially impact the likelihood that you don't get laid off yourself. So that fundamentally changed the risk profile. So big companies no longer are as massively less risky as a small startup is. There's still a gap. Big companies will always be a safer bet than a small startup. But if you're motivated enough to make the chance of the company's success different, that gets you nothing at a big company other than a couple connections to people who remember you for being the guy who worked hard. It might be the life or death of the company for a startup. And even if it doesn't succeed, if you did that, you put in the work and you're known for doing that, The connections you'll make and the opportunity you have to do the next big thing is unbelievable. Two of the biggest startups from recent batches and just recent VC stuff in general came from Gatsby, one of the biggest failures in full stack software development. Gatsby was a disaster of a React framework. And both founders have since made their own things that are raising against absurd valuations because they're founders that have experience. They are building cool shit, but their business was a failure. And leaving that has set them up for a lot of success. So don't underestimate the value of the experience on either side, but don't overestimate the safety of the big business either now that we're in layoff culture. 1, don't pay somebody less than $125K a year to live in SF. 2, don't join a startup remotely if everybody else is in person. 3, 0.5% is fine, but don't lie about it. Show real paths. 4, stop hiring for things you don't like doing. I think that covers all of my hot takes here. People don't get this stuff, and I do my best to break it down so y'all can actually understand. And honestly, if you're a founder and you're struggling to explain this stuff to a potential candidate, maybe just send them this video. I went out of my way to try and be as transparent as possible about all of this because this stuff isn't easy to understand. It's very different from just getting paid a check every year. But it's one of the best decisions I ever made was to come out here and live this chaotic startup life. I wouldn't trade it for anything. And I think that might be my last point. You want to work hard, don't waste it on FANG. If you're the top 1% of engineers and you work at a FANG company, you might go from $300K a year to $350K a year. If you're the top 1% of engineers and you go to an early stage company, you might double their likelihood of success. You might be the reason they become worth $1 billion in the future. If you want to put that extra work in, don't sell yourself short. If things like the phrase work-life balance means a lot to you, if living in a rural area to raise your family is something you care a lot about and want to do, if making less money for a few years because you just want to grind and make this business successful is exciting to you, do it. But if you really care about those other things like work-life balance, living in a rural area, being able to work remote, having flexibility, having options, being able to work less hard some weeks and work harder others, all of that is fine. I'm not talking shit on it when I talk about this. I'm trying to make sure you're realistic here. If you're the type of person that gets home from work and opens their laptop and codes more because they like to, do it. But do it at a company that will reward you for it. If when you're done for the day, you want to close your laptop and just relax and do other shit, don't join one of these early stage startups. And if you join one and realize it's not for you and leave, that's fine too. Just make sure you can survive a year so you can get that cliff payout. I think that's all I have to say on this one. I hope this helps you guys better understand how compensation works at startups. It's such a common miss, and I wish people would better explain it. This is a video that would have made my life much easier if it existed when I was looking at joining a startup, and I hope it helps you guys out like it would have helped me. Let me know what y'all think. Until next time, peace nerds.